A ton of new information has come out about Assassin's Creed Valhalla over the past couple of days, and because of that, I'm going to be doing a short series of videos where I just kind of go over some of the more important details and go a little bit more in depth into them, whereas if I was just to do it all in one video, I may not be able to get out everything I want to say, and it'd be 10 hours long. So without further ado, let's begin this series with an episode about how mythology is going to play into this game. So before we start, remember that if you do enjoy today's video, to leave it a nice, thick, and I mean thick, just the thickest and most juiciest like possible on this video. And of course, if you do enjoy content like this, as well as the other content I create on games like Cyberpunk 2077, Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, and Battlefield, then make sure you hit that big red sexy subscribe button that's right underneath the video. And also, if you do want to keep up with this series, you're probably going to want to, click subscribe, I'm just saying. But anyway, today's episode is going to be about mythology in this game. Now, there's a few things that I want to talk about in regards to mythology in this game. Now, if you have been following this channel for quite a while, then you know that I disdain magic in Assassin's Creed, but that's okay because the lead narrative director, Darby McDevitt, has already said that there is no magic in this game. But wait a minute, how come I can go to Asgard and Jotunheim and there's these blue guys and there's like the black shuck is in the game? What's going on? What happened? Well, we're going to try to explain that today in a way that makes sense for the games and why I don't think it's as totally crazy and insane as a lot of people may think it's going to be. I don't think this is going to be Odyssey 2.0 in regards to mythology. I think this is going to be a much more grounded experience as they've been describing. So to kick it off, let's talk about Asgard and Yodenheim. How come we can access those places? Well, we do know that the seer Valka in the settlement called Ravensthorpe, we actually found out, she is going to be the one that lets us access these places of different time and space, I think is how they describe it. And she has some kind of herbal potion or tea that we drink, and that's how we access it. Now, I do think that she may have some sort of piece of Eden, possibly. It could be some just crazy drug sequence. I don't think that would make as much sense, whereas if she did have something either like Sutek's Apple of Eden from the Origins DLC, Curse of the Pharaohs, I think that this offers a very similar power to that, whereas you can visit the quote-unquote afterlife or the other realms of the world. They're not really there, but it lets you kind of see them and offers this weird alternate kind of dimension you can pass through. It's hard to explain, but it seems very similar in that kind of ability that it can take you to Asgard and all that. And I don't think these places are actually going to be real if it does follow along this kind of line. And I do think this would be a really good idea because it would really tie the DLC of Origins with this game, and it helps make the games feel like a much more connected universe rather than just singular games that try to force their own story into things and don't connect in any other way with the other games. I think it'd be a really cool way to tie those things together, make it feel like a much broader world that actually functions. And it's not unlikely that Sutek's piece of Eden, considering if you found out what happened to Sutek in Curse of the Pharaohs, then you would know that it's very possible that the Romans ended up with it and it could have found its way all the way up in England or Norway or wherever Valka finds this ability. Either way, I'm very interested to see how exactly this is going to play into things, but I do think it is possible that it makes sense considering these are going to be dream sequences or at least drug induced or possibly through a piece of Eden. It could work. Now, historically, dream sequences are actually a pretty common thing around this era. In fact, one of the significant characters in this game, Alfred the Great, he actually has a very famous dream just before the Battle of Eddington, which I won't go into too much details with because there's very much potential to spoil the events in the game if I went into it. But essentially, he had a dream sequence where Saint Cuthbert, who I talked about in a previous video, and who I think possibly might have been the cloaked man in the initial cinematic trailer, but I'm sort of leaning towards it not being him. I don't know. I do think he's going to play a role in the game. He has a dream where he is visited by this Saint Cuthbert, and I do think that this will play into the game. I do think that Alfred and Eivor will come to an uneasy alliance, and if maybe Valka's there, maybe she puts them both in a dream sequence or with a piece of Eden or something like that. I don't know. I'm sure there's going to be something along those lines that would be very, very cool to see and how it plays out. and how it can have an influence on people of this era who did believe in magic and things like that. You had the legend of King Arthur. A lot of people believed in magic back then with like Merlin and all this stuff. It's not unlikely that what is going on here is the things that people, the common folk, would have considered magic, and these days we consider it nonsense, would have been something in the Assassin's Creed universe that has to do with the first civilization and how it is just misunderstood technology. And I think that is what provides such an interesting veil over things. Now, the other thing I want to talk about are the cryptids. You might think of them as the mythical beasts and the big old boss fights, things like the black shuck. Normally, I would have a problem with this, but there is a distinct difference between a cryptid like the black shuck and Medusa with snake hair. There's a very distinct difference because something like a large black wolf dog hybrid thing is much more likely to exist. Think of the black shuck as maybe not quite like Bigfoot, because I feel like Bigfoot has been overly done to where it's almost a meme now, but some people do still believe in him. But along those lines, where it's a creature that could potentially exist. We just don't have a ton of evidence for it, at least not enough to say that it definitively does or did exist. A lot of people have seen it. They've reported sightings. They say it could have been real. It's very common around England. Even to this day, some people still say that they can see it, whereas something like Medusa or the Cyclops is just straight up mythological. There's no way anything like that existed. I don't care what powers they say the Piece of Eden had. There's just such a stark difference there. And I really like the idea of cryptids being in the game. I don't have a problem with it. Personally, there's cryptids I think could potentially exist. I think it's a very interesting subject. But to see something like that in the game, I don't think it's a big deal, and I don't think it plays into the mythological aspect as much as some people think it does. Again, people really may think that they see these kinds of things out there, and for someone who travels as extensively as Eivor or any other Viking at the time would have, the likelihood that they saw some weird things out in the woods is pretty likely. Now, did they get in epic boss fights with these things? Probably not, but that's where I think the video game stuff kind of comes into play. It's a game. It's okay to have that kind of fight. Now, the other thing are the magical boss fights with the drug-induced kind of thing with the Daughters of Lyrion. I've talked about that before. I hope there's more than just one way that Eivor gets poisoned to have these kinds of illusions. I just hope it's more varied than just, oh yeah, we walk up 8 times in a row and the same exact thing happens. I do hope it's a little bit different each time, but again, it's drug induced, so it's not that bad. It does look a little just out of place, at least in my opinion, but it could have a very interesting storyline to it, as well as the theme of like this cultish behavior of this time period. I think we're going to see a lot of that in game. But anyway, this has been the first episode of my series about some of these really interesting topics within Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Like I said before, I'm going to be covering a lot of other topics like historical figures, cults, the Excalibur, the Pieces of Eden, and how those things are going to play into this game, or how I believe they're going to play into this game, just to add a little bit of speculation and a little bit of fun to this lead up to this hype train that we're all on as we wait on this game to release. So remember, if you did enjoy today's video, to leave it a nice and just fabulously thick like, and I will see you guys in the next video.